Aloha! This is in response to Keegan's chapter on conflict, leadership, and knowledge creation. Specifically, we were asked to focus on the two different marriages at the beginning of the chapter, and to tell the differences between the two. It was funny because the first time through reading them, I didn't actually see much of a difference. I thought they were very, very similar. But the more that when I finished the chapter and was able to go back and read them again, I noticed a few more of the differences, but they're very, very subtle. And it was especially interesting to compare them to the third level of thinking and to see how things have kind of progressed through each of these marriage situations. But one of the main similarities between the fourth and the fifth level of thinking in the two marriages, between the Abels and the Bakers, I think their names were, was their ability to focus on the other person and the relationship itself. It wasn't so much focused on the self, on the wants and needs and desires of the individual, but on the relationship that is had with this other person, and able to see the differences that the marriage can bring, that as opposed to the third order of thinking where they're focused on the similarities and the view of the soulmate. But onto the fourth and fifth level of thinking, they're more thinking about the differences, about things that are unique and things that are special. And on that line, both of them talk about a different level of closeness than they've had in the past. That these differences somehow can make them grow closer together through that uniqueness, through those differences, and making themselves special, I think. And another important thing was that they both saw the need for conflict. And we learned with Peter, and then Peter viewed conflict as something bad. If they were truly soulmates, they shouldn't have to fight, they should agree on just about everything. But both the fourth and the fifth level of consciousness recognize a need for conflict and how that can help them grow closer together through those differences that kind of make them unique and special, both as individuals and as a relationship. Some of the differences that I saw, the first one that jumped out at me was kind of the note of humility that was needed in order to have the fifth level of thinking, that it recognizes a lack of wholeness or completeness within the self. It recognizes the need for the other person because they're not completely whole themselves, they're not perfect. Which, not to say that they thought they were perfect at a third or a fourth level either, but I think just more of an awareness of the fact that there are things to learn upon, to improve upon, that they've never fully reached it, they're never quite there. Tying into gospel standards, that there's an eternal progression, in a sense, is kind of the way that I viewed that. Made it a little bit more familiar to me. And it definitely takes a sense of humility to be able to do that. So that was the first major difference that I saw. And the ironic part was that even though it took more humility to reach the fifth order, that it was interesting how it could still focus on the self, and recognizing the differences not only in the other person, but the differences in the self as well, to note the contrast of the different levels within the self, that every woman has a little bit of man inside of her, every rich has a little bit of poor inside of them, and just the complex level of the self, wherein they are lacking completeness, but they are able to recognize their own level of complexity as well as the complexity of the other person. So it took that similar idea of differences to a whole new level to be able to excuse me, recognize the differences within themselves, how they're and the absence of absolutes in the fifth order of thinking, that there's more of a spread and a connection to all the different parts, and it kind of strengthened that relationship to all the parts of the self, to all the parts of the other person, which I found kind of interesting. And in that, it recognizes the need for the other person. Within a fourth level of consciousness, there was a whole person in a relationship with another whole person. But in this, it kind of recognizes the need for that relationship to kind of bring out those differences in each other and in the self, which makes the whole idea like very complex, hard to see from the perspective that I may have on things currently, but definitely had a lot of gospel ties. Definitely can see a lot of reasons and motivation for wanting to have this level of thinking, should I ever be able to fully develop that and to fully not get there because of that absence of getting there, but to be able to see a little bit more clearly.